Um, I like to see people's faces simply because everything that I have to say is so exciting, you know, and I like to see the glee when I talk about it. Okay, so I think we're recording and we're live on YouTube. If anybody out there stumbles across us, they'll be able to watch us. So it's been a really interesting quarter. Do you guys see me?
I can see you.
Okay, because I can't see me. That's odd. So anyway, it's been a really interesting quarter for me. I went over, there was a lot of things that had been left undone and a lot of things that needed to be done. So I've been actually very busy. But why don't we start this meeting with the approval of the minutes? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes as written?
I'll motion to approve the minutes. Mary Starrett.
Okay, Commissioner Starrett. Do I have a motion is on the floor? I vote. Everyone say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Technically, Commissioner, as I mentioned before, you can't really make that motion, but
I take it back.
take it back. So I think that would be left to Jim or Lindsay.
I would move to approve.
Sorry.
Okay, so there's Katie. Yay, Katie. So Casey, you're not visible. Do you not want to be seen today? Commissioner Kula, I should say.
My light's pretty bad right now, so I'm struggling with that.
Okay.
But
okay.
I am here with you. Let me see if I can change it.
Okay, so Katie, welcome. We just had a motion to approve the minutes as written, and we're taking a vote on that. Everyone in support of that, say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, great. As you can tell, I'm not a parliamentarian, and I'll just rush through that necessary part. So we're going to go at this point. Let me get my screen share. Okay. So here's our agenda for today. And I'm just going to review this really quickly. That's as you can see, we're going to go over the portfolio review, but we're also going to have an emphasis on credit quality of the portfolio when we get to that point. I've made some changes in safekeeping. We'll talk about that, new broker dealers, and then we'll move on. So here's the minutes, which we have approved. Here is our report. So I start out, as I did last time, with just a quick summary of where we are in terms of today's economy and the earnings. Well, that's not the right one. Let's go up here. There we go. The rate trends. So the rates have continued to go down, although now in the last month, they've started to just inch every so little bit. And you'll hear about it. You hear, oh, this rate's, the 10-year rate or the 30-year rates have gone down. But what's happened, which is normal, is that the short-term interest rates have actually gone down a little bit while the long-term rates have gone up. And so that is kind of fluctuates daily. But at this point, what we're seeing is a continued increase of drop. That's the wrong way to say that, but an increase in drop of the short-term rates that affect our investments. So as you can see in February, 3-month Treasury was 7 basis points, and now it's 3. The 1-year was 8, and now it's 7. What is significant is that inflation has gone up considerably, and it is now 2.6 versus 1.7 just a month ago. And that is a direct result of the massive amount of cash that the government is putting into the economy. And the Federal Reserve is okay with that. They have set a guideline of 2% being acceptable. And in this particular market in economic times, they're willing to let it go higher than that because they do not think that long-term that it will stay high, but they're watching it very closely. So, when you're in the grocery store or if you're buying a new car, you're going to see big jumps in prices because we have such a short supply of goods. And now that everybody has kind of coming out and re-entering the world, there's a very strong demand which pushes the prices up and causes quite a significant, I think, jump in inflation in a 1 month period. I like this chart down below. I won't go into detail, but if you look at it, you'll see exactly what happened to the interest rates when and the price index, the Fed rates, et cetera, when we hit the pandemic period. And it's fairly dramatic, the fall off. And so it gives you an idea of what we are up against when we're investing our funds in the short-term bonds that we are. I'm not concerned about any of it, but it's helpful to understand that when we keep seeing a drop in return that and our earnings, so this is basically the same as what it was last time we met at the end of for the 2020 for the second quarter. The rates have gone down. I do not anticipate that the rates will continue to go down over the next year. I think they'll probably hold fairly stable. So where we are right now with an estimated earnings of 700,000 for this year is probably an accurate estimate. And probably you can expect to see the same for the next fiscal year as well. And because it's with all the effort that the feds are doing to moderate the interest rate market and without any kind of significant event, as we just had, things are now, we're in a healing period, a recovery period. The corporations are actually came out of this really well. We have had some challenges for a few of the bonds that we hold, but it's temporary. And so are there any questions about that? I think you all live in the same world I do. So our investment mix has changed from the last time that we went over the portfolio, and we have approximately the same amount in banks. And that's something that will fluctuate during the month. It just happens to be at the end of the month, it's 2,700,000. Mike Barnhart has told me he tries to keep it around 1.5 million so that he takes the overflow from that and puts it into LGIP. We have talked about it, and my goal is to keep LGIP below 46 million so that leaves Mike room to manage the funds effectively and no restraints as if we get too close to the top and then we get a cash inflow, it creates a problem for meeting the rules that we have for that. So the bond portfolio compared to previous years is down because there's no advantage to being in the bonds at this market, new bonds, when we have the kind of rates that we have, which I will show you later on. So this is the exact percentage of what we have. We have, once again, US Bank. We have Zions Bank, which I will explain in a minute. That is our safekeeping bank. LGIF has gone down slightly from where it was a month ago, and that's because they're in the same market as we are. The price per share has gone down, but our holdings are fine. They take all the interest, which would have been $4,000 in the last quarter, and they reinvest it in new dividends. So the corporate bonds, municipal bonds, and now the US government bonds I have, which you will see, I've invested in more US government bonds in order to improve the overall quality of the portfolio. And are there any questions on any of that? I know I'm kind of skipping through this stuff.
Chris, I have a question.
Okay,
The LGIP and making sure we are below what we're allowed.
right.
Do we have typically, and this might be a question for Mike, do we typically have an idea of what those major influxes of cash would be so that, because it looks like we're significantly under what we're allowed to have?
We are significantly under what we're allowed to have. Historically, we've never been close to that max. That is the only way you could have more in the LGIP is if you sold bonds, and the bonds are doing better in terms of return than LGIP. And so we have plenty for cash flow. Mike's cash flow, it looks to me, Mike, like it's about a $5 million draw most months out of the.
That could be about true, yeah. Payroll is about 3 million, I think, a month.
Yeah.
But to your question, Commissioner Starrett, normally our LGP is lower than this because we want to have money in the investment portfolio.
Right.
But like Chris said, because right now the investments are not doing as well as the pool is higher than it typically would be. We want to keep the pool low and keep as much as we can in the investment portfolio, except for in times like this when it's not profitable to do so.
Right. And yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Starrett.
No, thank you. That explains it. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And I have to say, I had, because every day is, I learned something new. Yesterday, Mike Barnhart answered many questions I had about exactly how he manages that cash flow. He sent me spreadsheets that he uses, and I was very impressed with what tight control he has on where the interest goes, and just keeping everything, prepared for anything that might come up. And he's always ready with the money that we do have in LGIP. He's always ready to address some emergency that we might have for cash flow. But he also monitors the interest that we earn and makes certain that interest goes back to the different departments that might have the most in those reserves. And so I was really pleased to see that. And I know that was something that Treasurer Green questioned, and I don't know if he ever actually got a copy of that report, because I think if he had, he would have realized that they're doing a great job. I cannot emphasize what a pleasure it is to work with the finance department and know that we've got people like Mike and Jen at the helm. It makes my job a lot easier. So for the third quarter, and this is where we get into a discussion about some of the things that I have a concern about. The bond investment summary is a little misleading, because when you talk about averages, the extremes are then eliminated, and you come up with a number that looks, very acceptable. The weighted average maturity being 2.75, which under credit policy, we should be basically under 3. That looks great, but part of that is also some very long-term bonds that we have, which Treasurer Green purchased to be assigned, if you will, to the solid waste fund. And the challenge with that is that there isn't just, we need to look at interest rate risk. And in a low interest market, when you go out long, if there's a change in the interest rate we have a bond that goes out to 2029, the interest rate risk on that, even though the rate may seem good, or did at the time it was purchased, is that newer bonds are going to come out with the same maturity that are going to be paid more, which makes the value of our underlying bonds go down, which if we don't sell them, that's not an issue. But I prefer, even though it is assigned to that portfolio, if I were investing in this type of market, I would not go long-term, no matter what it's assigned to, because you just, if you're a trader and you can buy and sell bonds, that might make sense. But with our general direction, we can't do that, or we shouldn't do that. Now, I may end up selling some bonds that are in the longer term, that if you look at the statement that we got from Zion currently, or at least at the end of the month, they were down considerably in terms of value if we needed to sell them. And that's going to happen if interest rates go up, even just a tiny bit. So I am concerned about the weighted average maturity. Our overall current yield, which is 2.13%, is a great yield. So it's fantastic. And part of that is because we do hold the longer term bonds, but not completely. And the unrealized gain, which is significant, if we were to just liquidate the whole portfolio, which I don't recommend, but if we were, we would actually make $586,000. So there's no danger in our portfolio at all, but we need to watch that unrealized gain or loss closely. Now, we may be sitting here a year from now where we have an unrealized loss, and that's okay, as long as we're not going to sell those bonds prematurely. So that's something I'm watching very closely. I don't know if I'll sell bonds at the longer term, but it could happen. So enough said about that. And in terms of the investment policy limit, which goes back to the LGIP versus the bond portfolio, based on the credit policy, we could today have 46 million in bonds. And but the approved limit that the commissioners have put in place is 27 million. And the actual right now is 18 million. If you look at our benchmarks, again, our portfolio 2.13%, LGIP is 60 basis points. And if you look at the treasuries, they're significantly below that. And that chart shows that dramatically. So we're doing well. I just feel that this portfolio needs a lot of monitoring, because now we get into the credit rating. Once again, it's below what the credit policy states, but not significantly below. But one of the challenges to this is that we do have 6% of the bond portfolio it's still investment grade, but in lower quality bonds. And really, the 30% is actually below what our policy says we should have as well. Now that's going to happen, and portfolios are going to shift around. But one of the things that I discovered when I was reviewing the bond portfolio, I had a couple of questions about some of the purchases. And so I contacted Treasurer Green, and he explained to me that he did not use broker dealers when he purchased the bonds, that he in fact did it all himself. And so every bond that we have was not in fact a general opinion about what would be a good investment. It was simply his perception of what was a good bond. And he also did not keep any records of why he purchased that bond. So if I look back at a bond that was purchased, at the end of 2020, I just know the information on the trade, but that's all I know. So that is something that will be different with me as the treasurer. I am not likely to think that I am the expert on every single bond. And I value the input that I get from others about purchases. And so that to me is a big change and something that I have rectified. Part of what has happened here is that we have also a few bonds that were overinvested by my standards. I have to, everything I say is simply my opinion. I don't want to say that what we have was done in a manner that is inappropriate. It's just not the way I would manage a portfolio. So we have 2.8% of our our whole portfolio actually is in Wells Fargo. And Wells Fargo has in the past had some problems and is now has a low rating. And I've actually put Wells Fargo on what I consider to be my credit watch list because of their lower rating. And then the Exxon that we have, at least some of those bonds are very, very long term. And so that's another thing that needs to be watched. Now, I have again increased the number of US government investments and will continue to do so because they're all, AA plus or AAA rated. We are well within our maturity constraints, as I said before, but numbers can fool you. So once again, it meets the criteria, but does not mean that it is something I recommend. Now here's the list of the activity for the last quarter since I've taken over. We have had a number of bonds, 1 million bonds mature, and I have purchased in an effort to draw down the LGIP so that it was more workable for the finance department. I have purchased bonds, and the bulk of those are within government agencies or very highly rated Royal Bank. The interest rates are going to be a lot lower than what we have, even lower than what we would get in LGIP. But at the time, we had to pull that down. And these are relatively short term. They're within the parameters, except for the one for Federal Home Loan Bank is longer, but it is also callable. And so that's the activity in the last year. This is what I really want to watch is this credit watch. I don't think that Wells Fargo or Oracle are ever going to be a credit risk for us. And we can hold those to maturity, but they're just on the list. And now that they make up 10% of our portfolio, the ones that I have put on credit watch. So that's significant. And I would say this, I don't know because I don't have any of the information about the purchases of these bonds, but my one concern is that bonds were purchased that were below the credit quality that is our guideline when they were purchased. And I'm going to do the best that I can to make certain that we bring that credit quality up so that I don't have to sit here a year from now and say, well, the overall average credit quality is below what we're supposed to have, but, and then have some reason for it. I think that hopefully we will move that up. Are there any questions about all that? So we lost Lindsay. And
Chris, I'm here.
oh, you're here. Okay, I'm sorry, Commissioner.
I guess I'm listening and I'm kind of sensing a concern that you have about how these investments were made. Did you get a response from Mike Green on as to, why he did this and
Well-
is he being forthcoming about information?
What Mike Green told me, and it was through a email, was that 95% of these were his decisions. Now I can go back and I can look at the trade confirmations, and I should be able to tell what the quality of the bond was at the time of purchase. But what does concern me is the not, you, under state statute, we do not have to have broker dealers when we make transactions. That's something that you could do, but it also says if you do that, that you must have research to verify what you've done and keep that record. And he did neither of those, and that is my concern. I think his trades, although not what I would want to do, were fine, but I think that it's kind of like CYA, if you will. I mean, if I make a trade, I'm going to make certain that there's a history so that if something goes south on me, I could say, but yes, at the time that I bought this is the reason that I bought it. And he didn't do that. So that's his personal choice. It just makes it so that it's very hard to identify the reasoning. Did he have an investment ladder and this bond fit within that ladder? Did he have, and the other challenge with the way he invested is that he bought small increments of bonds. And so I think he thought that if he kind of did a lot of small bonds, that it would diversify the risk. He almost like he was trying to run a mutual fund, in the sense that, well, we have 91 bonds right now, which for our size of our portfolio is ridiculous. So if you notice, the ones that I have purchased, I'm doing increments of 500,000, so that we have, and it also makes it, if we did have to, one, we get a better price when we buy it at 500,000, and two, if we had to sell it, we'd get a better price, because when you're in the investment, the institutional or the municipal investment world, people don't want a bond. I mean, if I'm looking for investment, why would I want to buy a bunch of $100,000 bonds when I can buy one? I mean, we've got people who are managing portfolios that are in the billions. And so to make it marketable, we need to have these bigger pieces. So I am concerned. I mean, it's just a matter of gradually having to change it. I wouldn't say, I don't want to second guess Mike Green. Does that answer that question at all?
Yeah, no, that makes more sense. But I suppose we appreciate that you document everything and make sure that everything's above board. So
yeah, the biggest part of this position, in my mind, is protecting the county's money, and making certain that we can be accountable and responsible to the taxpayers as to how we are managing the money. And so there's a lot of paperwork or backup work that has to be done that wasn't being done before, that has made my position pretty busy, pretty full. And I need to let you know that I love doing this. So it's not a problem for me. This is like my dream position, to manage a portfolio like this. The other thing that I want to address is, well, first of all, this is what I have done. We did not have a broker-dealer list that I could find. We had, as far as I know, we had approved Josh Stevens at one time, and we had approved Josh Gorham at one time. But the only person or broker that he did business with was Josh Stevens, because Josh Stevens worked for Multibank Securities, which is where our securities were being held. And so anytime Mike executed a transaction, it went through Multibank Securities, which automatically meant that Josh Stevens was the broker of record for all business. I have added some people, and the process is that in order to add somebody, I do what's called a FINRA research. And that is a service where they keep track of all the brokers, all the investment companies, and they keep track of any kind of lawsuits or misbehavior on the part of either the individual broker or the company. So I did FINRA searches on every company and every broker that I added or that I didn't add. And there's no charge for that. It's a wonderful service. And then I also went out to the state treasurers and got names of people that they were working with, that they enjoyed working with. And I then had them all fill out an application. And then they have all received copies of our credit policy. So they're pretty well vetted, and they are, this particular group I have found to be really responsive. They send me great information every day about the particular investments that they're recommending that are within our parameters. And if I had, let's say, if I were Mike and I said, okay, I looked on my own and I saw the XYZ company bond at 3 years paying 2% was a really good deal. Now, what Mike Green would do, he would just buy it through Josh Stevens at Multibank Securities. What I would do would be to send out an email to at least 3, maybe all of these people, and say, I'm looking at this bond. What is the best price that you could give me for this? So that I then know that and then I would buy it through them. Now, another thing, and I don't know, for those of you who remember when I was on the advisory committee, Mike may have done that, but then he would go back and buy it from Josh. So if I were Josh Gorham and I said I can get this for this, then he would go back to Josh and say, oh, can you get it for this? And then he would buy it from Josh. He didn't buy it from Josh Gorham, he bought it from Josh Stevens. And I find that to be disrespectful. I told Mike Green that at the time. So what I am trying to do, if these people are willing to send me information and to keep me kind of up to date on what are competitive rates, I owe it to them, if they have a good bid, to buy that through them rather than have one particular favorite. Is a real I just don't think it's a good idea to get really comfortable with doing everything with one broker. You need to spread that out for many reasons, but it's also because you can get complacent and you can end up, without knowing it, paying more than you should. So this list is a wonderful list of very talented. Unfortunately, they're all men. I didn't find a woman that I could, but I'm still looking for a woman that I would like to add to the list. I stopped at 5. I could have 10 if I wanted to. Are there any questions about that? Comments? Nothing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So we're going to talk about, and I skipped right over it, the safekeeping changes that I made. And I don't have a slide for that. So what I'm going to talk about is that we had an arrangement with Multibank Securities with Josh Stevens that they held all of our securities in an account that they held. Now they held those securities were actually being held by another broker-dealer called Pershing. And Pershing also has safekeeping services, but the people that were holding our securities was another broker dealer. So we were doing business with one broker dealer and another broker dealer had our securities. And the way they managed that was they, we had access to lots of great information because we were dealing with this larger company in terms of, which is why Mike Green could shop, because he could access their inventory and do that. It's very convenient. But technically, that doesn't meet state statute. We need to have a safekeeping firm. And I spent a lot of time interacting with Christian regarding this to make certain that my interpretation was correct. And we decided that it was not, in fact, did not conform to state statutes as to how we should have our portfolio held. And it was a relationship that started from the very beginning. We always banked with MBS, multi-bank securities. And so I did a lot of research and talked to the various treasurers. And the one that I selected was Zion's, which is strictly safekeeping. They are a bank, but they have a safekeeping arm. And that's where the account is. Now, the downside to that, which is what was Mike Green was looking for, is he was looking for quote unquote free safekeeping, which, as we all know, there is no free anything. And so we have to pay a small fee to Zion's for them to hold our securities, to collect our interest. If I buy something, they work with the broker dealer and get it transferred with the help again of Mike Barnhart, who does all those transactions. And I had a good example of that when I did have to sell a bond, which I will talk about, but I had to sell a bond, and they were involved in the transaction, and it went smoothly. So I feel, and I went out and shopped the prices. They don't have any, they don't buy or sell. They have nothing to do with the receipt that we got for that. So I'm very happy with Zion's. I looked at US Bank because US Bank is our primary bank, but they wanted 4 times as much money for the same service because they work with large firms and they're priced for volume, which we don't have. And a number of the state treasurers use Zion's, and I got very favorable reviews regarding those. Are there? Oh, and your statement, you will notice that you got, if you look, we got a statement from Zion's, and we also have one from Multibank Securities, and that's because even though I tried to time it to transfer at the end of the quarter, Multibank Securities didn't transfer the government agencies at the time that they transferred everything else. So they were there one day longer. So I have 2 statements in the future. We will just have the one statement from Zion's, and it's a very easy to read statement with lots of good information for us to look at. So are there any questions about that? All right, okay. So the other, I think that's it. That went a lot faster than I expected. So in general, I am trying to make certain that as we go forward in this very low interest environment, that we can make as much as we can while maintaining a solid portfolio. And in answer to Commissioner Starrett's question, indirectly, is that I would love to have more money in LGIP right now because they are paying well. But now we're fully invested. So as things come up, and there's a couple of bonds that are coming mature in the next few months, I will not be reinvesting those monies into bonds, but I will be letting those roll over into LGIP so that balance will increase gradually. And then in the fall, we'll have a different story again where we have to look at that. Ken.
Well, and I just wanted to also highlight, thank you, Chris, that I think, as everybody knows, with the American Rescue Plan Act funding, that we're anticipating receiving just over $10 million sometime in the next couple weeks. It was anticipated that we were supposed to receive that first installment within 60 days of passage, and my estimates has that around May 10th. And so we will have, direct from U.S. Treasury, we're going to be receiving, over $10 million that's going to be allocated to the county, and that's the first installment. And then 12 months later, we'll have that second one. So just kind of preparing for, we're going to have that sudden influx of, having that those funds being released from the U.S. Treasury.
Okay, good. And I have made suggestions, at least from my perspective, as to how we can maximize the return and make certain that, and I know that Ken and Mike are on top of this, but make certain that we can track that money efficiently. My recommendation, because it is $10 million, is that we open a second account with Zions, which they would charge us $250 to open, and then keep that money in like 60, 90 day until we can figure out when we need it. And then we could go longer term on that. Because if we just put that in LGIP, which we, well, maybe could right now, we would push us up to the limit, and then it would be a nightmare for a finance committee to try to manage that. And so as long as we, and these short-term bonds that I'm, bills really that I'm talking about, they're going to be paying like 1 basis point, 2 basis points. I mean, we're talking really low rates of return, but it's better than what we would get sitting in US Bank. And it keeps it very, very liquid. And we can ladder it. By ladder, I mean that we would, based on the input from Ken and Mike and the commissioners, of course, I would, do, some amount in 60 days, some amount in 90, some maybe in a year, so that the maturities coincide with the projects that may be planned for those dollars. So, and in particular, I know I sound like a broken record, but in particular, I know that Mike Barnhart has a lot of experience with cash flow management. And so I will rely on his judgment as to how short and long term we should go on those investments. Any other questions, comments? All right. Okay, so our next meeting is at the end of the fiscal year, and I don't have the date on hand, but it is I think it's the 4th Wednesday of, I guess that would be July. Is that right? Anyway, I'll send it to you. And if there aren't any other comments or questions, Jim.
Oh, thank you, Chris. Hey, I just wanted to say I appreciate what you're doing. The reporting is much better, and it's allowing us to see, as you said, maybe some longer term maturities that we might not want, and some credit risk that potentially there on the bond. So great job. And I don't think that Mike he didn't buy bad bonds. I don't have a problem with the bonds he bought. I don't think Chris does either. But at this point, as they've been downgraded, we have to watch them, and I appreciate having a watch list. Documenting your purchases is going to be really important. It's unfortunate Mike not do that, but we can't change that. But you can document going forward. As a portfolio manager for 30 years, you don't remember why you bought that bond. So, but if you document it, people can't second guess you, because you start second guessing yourself. Like, why would I buy that? But if you have that documentation of this was the best bond at the time I purchased it, and you're good. So Again, thank you for what you're doing, and I think it's making our job as the advisory committee easier to see into the portfolio. So good work.
Thank you, Jim. And Jim sent me a tracking tool for pre-purchase analysis yesterday. And so I will be using that so that I have a consistent format for each bond that we buy. And it's an Excel spreadsheet. So it should be, I just need to adapt it a little bit to us, but it's a great tool. And yeah, I love working with another investment professional because sometimes I'm just feeling like I'm out here all on my own. So that's great. I said the meeting was adjourned. However, this is a fourth quarter issue. And so, but I'm going to bring it up because it's an example of what happens when you don't have documentation of a bond and why you purchased it. I sold a bond. Now that would be in the fourth quarter records. And the reason I sold the bond was because the bond should never have been purchased. And there are so many red flags about this bond. And when I discussed it with Mike Green, he doesn't recall why he bought the bond. When I discussed it with Joshua Stevens at MBS, he said that he had nothing to do with this bond purchase. Now the bond it's for $100,000 and it's with an organization called Local Initiatives Support Corporation, which is an organization, it should technically be a municipal bond, but for some reason they were able to issue it as a corporate bond. This bond is to fund low-income housing in Chicago. And it was AA rated, which is why Mike could take comfort that this is a good quality bond. And I'm not saying that it's not a good quality bond. However, it matures in 25. So it's a 5-year bond. When he bought it in November of this last year, and it's a 5-year bond. And with a 1% return, that's okay. I did some research on it because I wanted to know who these people were, and found out what I told you, that it's a organization that funds low-income housing. But it also was sold with the provision that there are certain states where it could not be sold, and Oregon was one of them.
Wow.
And that has changed since the time, even since I started researching it, it has changed. But it was not allowed to be sold in Oregon, which is why I did research as to how did he come up with this bond and who sold it to him, because he shouldn't have been able to buy it. And the other thing that immediately set off bells is they do not, I read the prospectus, at least parts of it, they're like 100 pages long. And there was a disclosure in there that said that they do not plan, or there would not be necessarily a market for a secondary market for the bond. And that anyone who bought it should expect that they hold it to maturity because they might not be able to sell it. And then I looked at the activity on the bond, and in fact, no one had bought or sold this bond since November when he bought it. So the challenge with is marketability is essential, because that's what creates liquidity in our portfolio. So if this bond, if we waited, say, 3 years out and the rates were higher, and so that it was an incredibly discounted bond, you're going to take a huge loss on this bond if you could find somebody who would buy it. So this is where my broker-dealer network helped. I sent this bond out to all 5 of them, and it turns out there was only one buyer that wanted this bond. We got one bid. And so we sold it. We sold it at a $2,100 loss, which is not significant for a $100,000 investment. But it is a problem. And it's done. And, we've moved on. But I would feel remiss if I did not tell the advisory board. I could have waited till next quarter, but I think it was important to bring it up now. And so this is the kind, and all the other bonds, there's only a couple that seem a little, not that they're bad bonds, but they're not big name bonds. And so I'll be, and they're highly, like this is AA rated. So I have this in my hand here. And, you know, as much as I would love to help the people in Chicago with low income housing, I'm not certain that a municipality in Oregon should be investing in that. And, you know, plus I don't know what the future for low income housing is in Chicago. I mean, you know, so we buy municipal bonds, but there's and this, as I said, is not a municipal bond, but the municipal bonds that we're allowed to buy need to be in Oregon, California, or Washington. I think maybe one other state. Mike probably knows. And that again,
Oh,
yeah, go ahead.
did you say Idaho?
I didn't say Idaho.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so Idaho. I knew there was the fourth one. So we can buy those. And we have a number of municipal bonds in our portfolio. I also feel a little uncomfortable buying a municipal bond that I don't have the ability to know what's going on in that municipality, which is why we're restricted to certain geographic areas. But the, you know, like I noticed we have a bond in Pomona and it seems to have gone down a little. Now, short of going out and researching everything about Pomona, I don't know why it's gone down. It's still fine, but it's gone down. And it's still, we're still at a premium on that, meaning that we've made money off of it. But these are the kinds of things that you can't just buy a bond because it has a solid rating and you like the return. That's just not the way to do it. And so we take a small loss and we, as I said, we move on. But I just wanted to let you know that that has happened. Are there any questions on that? Okay. We were lucky we found a buyer. Very lucky. So, okay, now I will adjourn the meeting. No more bombs, I promise.
Thank you.
Thank you, Treasurer.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks,
Thank
Katie.
you.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.